Welcome to the Brave Wisdom Podcast, where courage fuels radical focus and wisdom cuts through the lies. Our guest today is Lorenzo Gomez III. Now, I'm not going to give a long introduction because he's got a Wikipedia page, so you can look him up. Please welcome Lorenzo Gomez III.
Hey, Brad, thanks for having me, man. It's great to be on.
This is pretty cool. You've written 4 books. I'm currently reading your Tafolla Toro. Yeah, the 3 Years of Fear. Oh man, and it's meaningful to me. And I'm going through some coaching, as I mentioned in one of my other podcasts, and counseling, and so it really resonates. And man, you share so much in there. And I think too, one of the things I heard about reading people's books, it's like having a conversation with them at a coffee shop, like an intimate conversation too, like, and having it for like 6 hours, however long the book is,
Yeah,
Um,
And also, I once heard Max Lucado say, and this really hit me as a writer. He said, if you download an audiobook, the average audiobook is probably about 6 or 7 hours. But he said, we live in a world where, and this is a quote, I'm jumping a quote from Tucker Max. Tucker Max once said that the new most precious resource, scarce resource in the world is people's attention. And when you think about all of the things competing for our attention every day, phones, whatever, and for someone to give you 6 or 7 hours of their life to read your book is an incredible gift. And so when I'm writing, I think I have to do everything I can to be worthy of those 6 hours, 6 to 7 hours that they're giving my story, because there's a million things competing for those 6 or 7 hours.
I love the format because you write a chapter, but then you write a letter to your 12-year-old self.
Yeah.
And I think I find myself almost like anticipating as I'm reading the book. I'm like anticipating the letter, like thinking, man, what's going to be the download here and what's the revelation? So I really like the format. But
Thank
you
you.
wrote 9 letters to yourself. And what do those letters mean to you? And which one do you find yourself needing to revisit or remind yourself of more and more these days?
When I first started meeting with my scribe Barbara about the book, I had it sort of mapped out in my head, and it was really just the stories, and most of them were very traumatic. I mean, so like for those that have not read it, the subtitle's 3 Years of Fear, so it's about my middle school experience and just witnessing a lot of gang violence, and and we were discussing, and she had this great question. She said, we need a way so that this book isn't just a big Debbie Downer. And so we're kicking around these ideas, and I had gone through with my therapist. I had done in my therapist does transactional analysis. We have the inner child and the adult and the parent, and I had done an exercise in one of the sessions where you write the letter to important people in your life. And when he first told me about it, I thought it was super cliche and dumb. And but I did it, and halfway through the first paragraph, I'm crying and snotting, and it was just very powerful. And so I was telling Barbara about these letters, and I forget if it was her or I, but one of us said, "What if we wrote the letters? What if we did that after these chapters, so that it's not just this really depressing, heavy story, but it's making sense of it?" And so that's sort of where the idea of the letters were born. And and so when I did it, I was sort of like, okay, well, what are the themes that I need to readdress with 12-year-old Lorenzo? Because now I'm adult Lorenzo writing to inner child 12-year-old Lorenzo. And I think the things that I was still struggling with at the time in my mid 30s when I wrote it, I was still struggling with anger, and I was struggling with fear, anger, anxiety, and specifically the story I was telling myself. And so those were some of the ones that I had to really, really focus, double down on. But I guess there's a couple that really jump out for me. So the first one is, what is the story you're telling yourself? What is the story you're telling yourself? And I just remember looking back, I was telling myself all kinds of crazy stories. And the one that I probably affected me the most, that I still use today in the professional world, was I had this very, very it was a very destructive story that said all conflict leads to violence. And so what this did was this incorrect story stunted me in my relationships, in my friendships, in my professional life, because I avoided all conflict, which anybody in a relationship knows you can't do, because I told myself this story from 12 years old. All conflict leads in violence, and I had to literally erase it. I had to bury it. I had to say this is not true, and there's an actual healthy way to do conflict that doesn't lead to violence. And so now I feel like I feel like I have the skills, but I felt stunted when I first started because those out there that have never had that story, you're just ahead of me, which is great. And I don't wish anybody to have that story, but that was one of the ones that I really struggle with, and I still have to remind myself of, hey, there's some conflict coming up, and you need to prepare for it, and you need to strategize, and you need to make sure that it's thoughtful, but you also need to tell yourself, Lorenzo, there's no violence. This is not a violent act. That this is something that can be solved, and it's completely solved.
That's rich, man. And I think what I admire about what you're sharing is that you've done the work. That counseling was work, deeper work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I
absolutely.
think what I have come to learn these last few years and the years that I've been getting coaching and reflecting on and kind of like walking around areas of my life that maybe I haven't ever explored as deeply as I should, or the stories and narratives that you believe, even the lies that we often believe in what we tell ourselves. And I think what I have come to learn is that when you do the deeper work, it brings clarity in every area of your life. But I'll pivot to this idea of focus, this idea of radical focus. What does it mean to you, and how has it shown up in your life and in your work?
I think one of the gifts I was given at Rackspace was, Rackspace. For those that don't know, we did managed hosting, but really, what it, if I described it to my mom, it's the plumbing of the internet. So it's a very unsexy mission. But one of the greatest gifts they gave us was they reframed it into a truly inspiring mission. And they said, we're going to be one of the world's greatest service companies out there in a world, which is the tech world, that's famous for ignoring its customers. And that really resonated with me. And later on, Graham would end up coining this phrase with another collaborator of his named Fred Reichheld. And I wrote my third book about this one sentence. And he said, everybody wants to be a valued member of a winning team on an inspiring mission. And I think that the inspiring mission part is what I go back to for your question. And so for me, the radical focus and my purpose always triangulates back to what I think the inspiring mission was. And so when I worked at Rackspace, my focus, my purpose was to execute the mission in whatever way I can, whichever way I could, in whichever role I was. And then when I left and I went to Geekdom, it was a little bit different because I was doing co-working, which again is not very sexy. But our mission was this macro vision of, can we create a startup scene in downtown? And that is what set my heart on fire. And so my purpose then became, whether it was through my work at 80/20 or Tech Block, right, was my purpose and focus was on this creating this tech scene that didn't exist. And so now all of a sudden I'm part of several organizations, but I never felt like my focus was diluted. I always felt like, okay, my purpose is this inspiring mission. And that's what I always go to. And that's what I would always, tell my team when I was recruiting people, is like, this is what we're doing. You might be a sales rep, but what you're doing is in service of this inspiring mission here. And it's true. And I can show you it's true. And I can prove that it's true. And so that's really, I think, how I govern everything I do, even when it comes down to my books. All the books that I write are very different in their categories. But I feel like there is an underlying common inspiring mission, which is I want to write stories from my experiences that help people. And I go, if I can execute that, that's my book inspiring, that's my book writing inspiring mission. And even to the companies that I'm doing now, which I'm involved in a couple, I think the overarching idea is that I'm singularly focused in trying to help San Antonio achieve its potential, specifically in the urban core. And so, again, I don't feel diluted in it. I feel like I'm actually just recruiting more teammates, but I feel like it's radical focus and purpose.
That's so good. And I've seen that evident in some of the projects you're working on currently, as well as even getting to work on a new project called The Voice of San Antonio that you're a
Yeah,
part of. That was a lot of fun. I actually got to design the website. You'll also go check it out, voiceofsanantonio.com.
it's
They're
super
releasing,
super awesome.
yeah, but they're going to really highlight the stories of our city. And what was it like? People sometimes think San Antonio, and it's like it was like not lame. We are one of the most fascinating, rich culture cities. So that's gonna be a powerful website. Go check it out, guys. It's gonna get. I know you're gonna write an entire art column there. What's your column called?
Yeah, so I'm going to be writing a column called The Urban Nerd, and it's really just about achieving San Antonio's potential. I think San Antonio has this weird identity crisis where um, we desperately want to not change everything because we love it. However, it has to change because there's no city is static. There's another million people that are going to be moving here in the next 15 years, and so I lived in London for 3 years when I worked for Rackspace. And I sort of fell in love with this unique kind of urbanism that I think fits here. And, there are people out there, oh, don't make San Antonio London. And I never want to make it London, but I just think that there are so many elements of big cities that we can incorporate. And I think because I had never left San Antonio as a kid, I didn't know what they were. I didn't know what it felt like to walk everywhere and not have to own a car. And so these things I just think are really cool, and I think they fit. I think that if they were done well, and actually I'll just say, most San Antonians that have been to the Pearl would agree that it's a magical place. However, most of them don't know why it's a magical place. And I would submit that the reason it's a magical place is because they built something that you would see in every big city, but they incorporated it into our city. And but it's operating on the rules of New York and London and Paris. We just don't see it because it's so thoughtfully designed. So I'm going to be writing a column about what are all those elements that make it special and that we can incorporate that I think would work here. And so it's going to be really nerdy urban stuff, but again, I think it's still radically focused and purposeful on my mission for the city.
And this pursuit of radical focus, I believe it brings clarity as it has for you in many ways. And you've navigated some transitions, but you've also, I can imagine, dealt with a lot of chaos in your career. And being in startups, I've always been told about the hustles. But can you share a time and a moment where everything felt chaotic, but you somehow found clarity to move forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. The reason I like that question is I think it speaks to one of my personality traits, which is so when I joined Rackspace, it was really San Antonio's first, tech unicorn. I was 20 years old. The company was founded in '99. I joined in '01, and so I joined. I would say that I joined while they were still in that chaos mode, and I just remember loving every second of it. And I felt like a pioneer. I felt like this is what it means to be a pioneer, where a lot of the rules are unwritten and you can try things and they fail and move on. And I remember we just created this process to do an upgrade, and I remember helping create it, and then they used it till we went IPO. And I was like, oh, I was there when that happened, and I had a say in that. And I think to your point, I'm of the personality that loves to come into chaos and help bring some order and some rules, but I'm also not the person that wants to maintain. And so I know I have a shelf life when it comes to a company because there are people. So I guess in one way you could say I'm a generalist where I like doing, some generalist activities, and then the real specialists come in and the real project managers and the real marketing people come in, and that's great, and there's a place for them. I love that chaos period because some people it's too risky for them, it's too anxiety inducing for them, and I just love it. I love it because in the Gallup Strength Finder world, I have restorative in one of my top five, so I'm a problem solver, and so we can solve this. There's a way to process this, and so I loved it, and I really thrived in that environment. And it's funny because when I moved to the London office of Rackspace, they were implementing a huge rollout that we had first experimented with in the US. So I was getting to redo that again, be a pioneer in the UK. And then when I left Rackspace, you know, when I went and started working for Geekdom, it was the same thing. I didn't know what co-working was, and I think the co-working industry was actually pretty new at that time. And so it was once again this new blank canvas of which I got to say, well, what are the rules? The rules are whatever we want them to be. and the rules are whatever work. And let's put down some processes that work that help us to scale. And then eventually I had to sort of, fire myself and get people in there to do, the everyday management and to make sure that the space is, clean and to make sure that we're selling right. But I love those places, and it also makes me appreciate the specialists even more because you need to surround yourself with those teammates at the appropriate time. And so I also am just very aware of my shelf life in the chaos season, which is really always in the beginning. And so I think I've done a better job, in my career, but I love it. I love writing a process that didn't exist and it working, and and then moving on to the next one.
That's exciting. And I've heard it said, maybe you can speak in this too, that in a lot of companies, there are people that are there for the scale up and then they hit a plateau, and the people that got you there may not get you to the next level. And I think that's kind of what you're describing at times as well, too, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And I think, look, the problem for the leadership, and actually no, not the leadership, the problem for everyone is that there may come a day where you say, this place has outgrown me. And a lot of people don't like that. And a lot of people can't handle that. And so I knew, and actually, I didn't know it until I left. And when I left, I realized I can never go work for a big corporation. I was there from the chaos to IPO and past IPO, and I just realized I can't. And I'm glad I had the experience. But if you'd have told me, which there would have been a case for, to say, "Hey, Lorenzo, we've outgrown you," I would have been devastated. I would have felt betrayed and hurt. But if I really now reflect on it, I think it would have been completely reasonable for a leader to say, "Man, you got to either go into a new department that has that startup feel, or you need to go find another startup," which is what I did. Which is eventually what I did. And so, and for leaders out there, I think that if you're having a problem, it's this may be, this may be something. If you're scaling and you have rapid growth, a lot of times we hang on to people because, they were so instrumental in the beginning, but you almost have to give someone to sit down and say, "Hey, it's outgrown you. And it's not that we don't want you, but you're going to have to either become a specialist and change your skill set in order to scale with us, or you need to go out." And that's a very difficult conversation for a lot of people.
And that makes sense to me because in those startup modes, generalists, you do have to be that just by the nature of startup.
That's
Like
right.
you've got to play many hats. And I think that's what you're describing is you have that ability. And I think, and I do too, I love complexity and bringing like things that don't make sense and put them into a
Yes.
packaged way. The websites, the vision of a big website, and then seeing it launched is always a fun project. But like you, I like the websites that are like, 90-day projects. I'm on to the next one. And there's all this
Yes.
turnover. And then I've come to learn from the EOS traction training I received, is that a lot of the roles are just seats. And some people get in the wrong seat or the seat's uncomfortable. And it's up to the manager and the person to negotiate some sort of transition to find a better seat.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, also you have to keep in mind that everything you're doing is in service of the customer. And so for me, it was, hey, if I'm if I'm still doing generalist activities, but I am bringing quantifiable value to the organization that can be measured, whether it's retention or sales or whatever, then you can, I feel like you'll extend your shelf life. But a lot of people can't. It's just hard because it's the golden handcuffs. You have a paycheck. It's hard to look yourself in the mirror and say, this place is not for me anymore, but I still want to pretend that it is because I want the paycheck and the paycheck is stable. And that's just tough. And that's why I try to now stay in the early part of it because I know that's where I'm the best.
Can you do this for our audience and those listening? Like, I know that there's a lot of people that may be transitioning or even feeling this uncomfortable in their seat, but maybe talk to the two people, the people that are in a seat that they're uncomfortable with, and then the person that maybe got laid off or in a season of transition in their career. And what would you say to those individuals?
I think well, the first thing I'd say to both of them is that um, your career is not linear. K through 12 education is linear. You go up and to the right. You take you read the book, you take the test, and you go up and to the right. but your career is this up and down journey. And so if you're feeling uncomfortable, you might have your next stop on the journey might be down, it might be flat, it might be backwards, and that's okay because and going back to what we talked about earlier, if you're telling yourself the story that I have to just advance higher and higher, higher, that is a lie. And I love my career in hindsight, but sometimes I had to go down to go up. So I had to step down to get a better title to position me for a better salary later. Sometimes I flatlined, which means I did the same role for many years, which drives a lot of people crazy. But I'd go back and do it again because it was the right thing for me at the right time. And so I would say that, the first thing I would say is don't compare yourself to the career of someone else. It's not linear, it's a journey. The second thing that I would say is if you're in an uncomfortable chair, you really have the choice. The choice is yours. You can adapt to what the organization needs, which is hard for some people, or you can take um, the plunge and try to go find something else. And I'll tell you, this is scary. It's scary for everybody. The person that's been laid off, I'll tell you, um, and actually, this is a story I wrote in Slaughter Diaries. I had a friend who worked with me at Rackspace, and she ran the corporate events department, and she's a straight stud. Still is. And her name is Jamie Cook. She has an incredible company now. And I remember she called me, and she wasn't happy with her boss. And I said to her, I said, "Hey, Jamie, I want to give you some feedback as your friend." I said, "You don't like your current boss. You didn't like your last boss, and I don't think you're gonna like your next boss. And it's not that you're a problem. The problem is you need to be the boss. And the only way to be the boss is to be an entrepreneur, which means you need to quit Rackspace." I said, "But I understand why you don't want to quit Rackspace because you have a great salary and medical benefits and all that. And you're scared that if you quit and try to start this company, it will fail and you'll be homeless." And she started crying on the phone and she said, "It's exactly right. I just had a baby. I can't afford." And I said, "Let me tell you a story." I said, "I left Rackspace and I went to this tiny little startup called City Voice, and it absolutely crashed and burned in the 10 months I was there." I said, "So it totally failed and I am not homeless." And so she quit Rackspace, created her own events company. I was her first customer as the CEO of Geekdom, and she's now one of the top two uh, event companies in San Antonio and is just crushing it. And so for those listening, it's hard to hear that story and go, is there any way for me to avoid that scary crying part? And the answer is no. You can't avoid the scary crying part. You have to, but I think it's like, um, but you won't end up destitute. When you're forced to figure it out, you will figure it out. And I think that that's the encouragement I'll say is that it's not the end of the world. Even if you got laid off, the founder of Geekdom is a guy named Nick Longo, incredible, brilliant guy. And he used to say that entrepreneurship most of the time doesn't start on your best day. A lot of times it starts on your worst day. And most of the time that worst day is the day you're laid off or fired. And so I would say just reframe how you view it. But I'm not going to just, say it's all roses and sunshine. It's definitely a tough thing. But I think if you look at those that have gone before you, be encouraged that it's a completely surmountable mountain that you can overcome the obstacle.
That sounds like some brave wisdom right there, man. Thank you for sharing that. Seriously, I was receiving that because I remember what you were describing with your friend is that when Leslie and I started our business, at times it felt like you were jumping out of an airplane. You're like, "Where's the parachute?" Like it's
Yep.
scary. And there was one other thing that you said that resonated with me because I was told this by my business coach, who really I can say has like rewired my brain in a lot of ways. I didn't have a commerce mindset, or I didn't have a lot of the things that make good entrepreneur business decisions. And so I had to develop that. But he did say this. He said, and he confronted me one time because I had like plan B. I'm like, well, here's plan A, and this is what I want to do. And this is what I'm feeling like is gonna work. But then, oh, there's still plan B over. He's like, get rid of plan B. And so what would you say to people that are doing that as well? Like if especially in the entrepreneurial space, you got to go all in, don't you?
First of all, I categorically agree with you. You have to burn the ships. So, I mean, I have a couple thoughts on that. I think the first one is, it is okay to have a side hustle where you're preparing and you're doing things and you're working on the idea and you're preparing for the inevitable jettison from the mothership. But every entrepreneur will tell you that there is a moment where you have to take the leap. And look, some people will cross it over and, oh, they'll start making money on this one, but most people won't. And I would advise anyone to say, you can't rely on that. There is a point where you have to decide. And this is why the entrepreneurial journey is the most, I think, not misunderstood, but not even like understood in America, because no one wants to go home for Christmas holiday and tell their family, "Hey guys, guess what? I'm planning on quitting that six-figure job and walking away from that great medical dental plan, and I don't know if I'll be able to make payroll, but I'm going to chase this wild idea. And who's with me?" Right? No, no, America does not. It does not designed for that conversation. America is designed for safety. Go get the safe thing and do the safe thing. Yet our entire economy is built on small and new businesses. And so any economist will tell you that our world runs because millions of brave men and women have looked at that cliff and jumped off. And I just think so anybody so I would say you can prepare the side hustle to a point, but there is a point where you have to decide to take the leap. You have to decide to take the leap. And everyone has, and it's scary. There's no way, which is why if you can find other entrepreneurs, it's almost like AA, because no one else will understand the fear like another entrepreneur. And you will have really well meaning people in your life that want to support you, but they can't because, and I'm just going to give you an example. If you're listening to this podcast and you have never woke up with the panic in the pit of your gut with the following question: I don't know if I can make payroll this week. If you have never felt that, you are not in the entrepreneurial sphere. It is a completely different anxiety, um, that someone who's experienced that, when you tell them and they nod their head like Brett, you have this connection that you don't have to someone whose paycheck just goes to direct deposit. It's just a completely different world. And I don't say it to disparage anyone. I just say, that's why entrepreneurs need each other and you need community, because you have to be able to be vulnerable and say, man, I'm so scared that this one employee I have whose livelihood and mortgage payment depends on me. I don't know if I can make it. It's a great thing. And so I'd say, you have to take the leap. You have to surround yourself with other entrepreneurs that are help you, because it is a very, very it's a high risk, but it's a very stressful journey, but it's worth it. And the other thing I would say, this is just something one of my mentors once told me, which I thought was hilarious, and it goes to your just having no plan B. And I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's something like, if you want to be innovative, take a zero off your budget. If you want to be innovative and profitable, take two zeros off. And so it's just like when you're forced to figure it out, you just get more creative and you just get more scrappy. And I feel like, but that's what you have to do. What I love about that is that that's the mindset of entrepreneurship in one little.
I love it. And right, and there were times when Leslie and I would look at each other and say, "Well, who's going back to a corporate job?" I mean, there have been times when when I didn't want to go and she didn't want to go, and so, but we hunkered down and we just went the next 90 days. So the thing that I live by, and this might be the space we're getting out of finally, praise God, it's feeling good, like to start thinking beyond that. But there were seasons in our business and entrepreneurship that was like the next 90 days. We float the next month, right? We got this, and it's been a crazy ride. But I can tell you this, and this is something too to speak of too, that maybe someone's taking the leap, and you might have experienced this, and you probably experienced it even now. There's freedom in this. The things that Leslie and I get to do now, the retreats, we do quarterly retreats, we plan our year, we're in control, and I think so. I heard it said one time that yes, you may have stability and you may have a good income, but how much is that worth and compared to time and freedom? Even more time that Leslie and I have with our kids. So even that balance and that reframing of money sometimes, because money's not always the things that are that are ultimately going to bring your life like fully make you really is money's not the thing that'll always make you fully alive is what I would say. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I could not agree more. And it's funny. My dad's 82, and he's had some health issues. And one of the things that entrepreneurship has afforded me is I just have a standing rule, which is if I don't have a lunch meeting on my calendar, I go have lunch with both of my parents. And it's funny because to what you were saying earlier, if you asked me the value of that, like if a recruiter said, Lorenzo, we want to offer you a huge salary to go to this, but you could never do that before. I don't know the number I could come up with in a comp plan package that replaces that. I go, I don't think you could give me a comp plan that will replace the flexibility to eat with my parents, to laugh with them whenever I want. And it's not whenever I want, it's whenever I have the availability. But if I'm stuck behind the desk, which by the way, and I'm not saying one is greater than the other, it's just the trade-off, right? Is I'm willing to put up with all of the other risk of entrepreneurship, especially in this season in my life. I go, to me, that's the big one. The other one too, that I think, because you're so right. I think that one of the books that I want to write later on is about currencies. I call it like the 4 or 5 currencies that have nothing to do with money. And one of them is people. And I think that when you're an entrepreneur, and look, you're always going to be around people, and some people you like, some people don't. But I decided, a couple years ago that I was not going to choose to work with people that I didn't trust. And when you are collecting a paycheck from someone else, you can't make that statement. And so you have to work within the constraints that you're given. And so I can choose my customers, I can choose my partners, I can choose my vendors based on my moral compass and based on my principles. And that has become very valuable to me, because it's made my relationships more rich. And I just go, you know what? I don't want to do that, and I'm not going to do it. And I don't care if it costs me money. And so I think that's one of the other currencies that I think the ability to work with people I trust and to say no to people that I don't, or people that I don't, have alignment on my principles with. Again, I can't quantify that, but it's so important to me at this stage in my life that I won't give it up.
Man, I love where we're going with this because I actually wrote in preparation, I wanted to talk about connection with people and community. And I see that in you. I see that even many don't know. I actually go to your men's group and I started going, and it was a big leap for me. I haven't honestly been a part of a men's group in a very, very long time. But yeah, how do you maintain that community and those friendships and those real relationships that actually know the real Lorenzo? Because I think I've struggled in the past that I sought to even be known, but people really didn't know me. Or I've pivoted to say something like this: I seek not to be known, but to be someone worth knowing. So I've had to know myself better. But I say it this: what advice would you give to someone that's struggling to make connection and authentic relationships?
Yeah, I think, man, that's a great question. I'll give the best answer I can, and it's gonna I'm gonna answer it in a weird kind of way. So there's a pastor. I'm sure you know of him. I refer to him as a theologian. He's since passed, Tim Keller, and he had a podcast, and he had a series once about um, sex, singleness, and marriage. And he did this with his wife, and they had this great Q&A. And he said something that I think really affected how I do community. And he was arguing for the biblical version of marriage, which is sex before marriage. But what he said was, he said, when you're in a relationship with someone, he said, you have to be naked in every way before you're physically naked. You need to be naked financially, naked emotionally, naked legally. And I just thought, I am looking for people, friends and partners, that as I get to know them, I'm asking myself the question, can I be emotionally naked in front of this person? And if the answer is no, then I don't discard them, but I don't go to that deeper level. And so and look, all of my business partners, I am both emotionally naked I am financially naked, and when we signed our contract, I am legally naked. I am legally vulnerable with all of them. And so that's one of the things that I'm looking for is, and when I say what I'm looking for is, can I be safe? Can I be emotionally naked and safe in your presence and tell you, hey, this is my struggle. This is, actually, I'll give you a great one. When I was writing Tafoya, there was a moment, and I think most authors uh, do this, but I really did it, where you reach a point where you say, "This book is terrible. This sucks. Why did I do this?" And I had reached that point, and I had a weekly call with Barbara, and I was rescheduling them, and I kept avoiding her. Uh, and I finally got on the call, and she said, "Hey, what's going on?" And I took the chance because I love Barbara and she's awesome. And I said, "Barbara, I'm really discouraged, and I think this book sucks. And I just need encouragement, and I just need you to tell me that it doesn't suck." And I'll never forget, and this proves the point. The first thing she said to me, the first thing she said, "I'm so proud of you and thank you for telling me that's how you felt." First thing she said. And then she said, "This is going to be a wonderful book. It is going to be a great book." And what I was doing was I was saying, is it safe for me to be naked, emotionally naked, about this book that's very personal to me, about 3 years of fear? And the first thing that she did was show me that she was safe. And she said, "Thank you for telling me how you felt." That was her way of saying, it is safe here to be emotionally naked. And I think that that is the essence of true community. We are all looking for a community of which we can, at our own speed, choose to slowly but surely take the clothes off and be naked in the areas that we need to be seen by the people that we want to be in community with. And that is not an easy thing, but it is the ultimate fulfillment when you get it.
Man, I love that. And it's something I seek. I was even part of a church launch team that was really about, community. And it literally didn't have a Sunday service. It just had community. And it was a refreshing time. And I think there was a moment that we even had a life group at our home, and this community and this experience was like something we've never tasted before. And I think it's what you described. We were so open with each other, and we shared not just our faith, we shared our lives. And I think that's something I see in you, is that not you just don't want to share business, you want to share your life and who you are. And I think that's something that I want with this podcast as well. I want my guests to not just share the wisdom, but the take the curtain back a little bit and show the vulnerable things, show the struggles. I love how your books do that so well, that you people might see your resume and say, "Man, that guy's up there. He's done these things." But then they get to see your story and they realize, "Man, he's not much different than me. And he's just been relentless and had the courage, and he's never given up." So, Lorenzo, on behalf of the audience, I want to thank you. On behalf of the you being one of the first interviews on my podcast, thank you, because you did an amazing job today. And I just want to encourage everyone listening too, as we wrap up, go purchase his books, because again, they're powerful stories, and you'll want to get to following his work, because I know there's more to come. Check out The Voice of San Antonio. That's launching like now. And that's going to be an exciting work. You'll be hearing voices from all over San Antonio, because we love our city. That's another thing I want this podcast to be about. Be about San Antonio, because there's so much going on here, and we want to celebrate it. And we'll bring that to the forefront. I know you'll be a big part of that. But until next time, subscribe, share with your friends. Remember, this is the Brave Wisdom Podcast, where courage fuels what we talked about today. Radical focus and wisdom cuts through the lies. We will see you next time.